These are the 5 most common mistakes in bookkeeping for a Cypriot Limited. Please make sure to avoid these mistakes at all costs to prevent unnecessary expenses, trouble, and headaches. So watch the following video very carefully now. Hello and welcome. This is Florian Wilk from CMC here in Larnaka on the beautiful Mediterranean island of Cyprus. And in today's video, I want to share with you, from my perspective, the most common and important mistakes that you should definitely avoid if you run a Cyprus Limited or are considering becoming active in business in Cyprus. Because I see it time and again, especially with clients who want to switch over to us from others, law firms, that these mistakes are made, and that's very, very annoying because it can actually cost real money and cause a lot of extra work. So, mistake number 1 is not validating the VAT ID number of the invoice recipient on reverse charge invoices. This means that if your limited issues an invoice to a company in another EU country for an intra-community supply, or possibly also for a service provided across borders, then the reverse charge applies. And in that case, you absolutely have to validate the VAT number, that is the VAT ID number or UID number of the invoice recipient. If it later turns out that this VAT ID number is not valid, and that does happen, it really isn't that uncommon, so you really have to be careful, then it can actually result in you owing the VAT. And then you have to pay an additional 19% VAT. That's very annoying, but absolutely avoidable. So please don't make this mistake. If you have us do your bookkeeping, then of course we'll keep an eye on that. We'll double check it anyway. But that's not common practice, that's not the standard. That's why, as an entrepreneur, you're always responsible for fulfilling these obligations and making sure that your invoices are really written correctly. This includes the mandatory information, but it also includes the service description, making sure it fits, and, as I said, most importantly, the VAT number. Okay, then the second very, very common mistake I keep seeing in balance sheets is that there are no costs recorded for substance for a place of business. That means if you have a company in Cyprus, of course you want that company to be recognized as such. You don't want a shell company like somewhere in the Bahamas or so, where there's nothing but a mailbox. And then, of course, a foreign tax office might quickly get the idea and say, wait a minute, is everything really above board here? There might be something going on here, yes, something to hide or whatever. And that's something we absolutely don't want. I also don't think that's necessary if you're doing business in Cyprus or even moving to Cyprus. And that's why it's extremely important to always have expenses in the balance sheet for substance, especially for the place of business, meaning the office, and how you handle that. And there's a really good trick for how you can, on the one hand, claim a home office and on the other hand, generate expenses for the place of business. I'd be happy to share that with you in a personal conversation. But what's important for you to know is that you should always have certain expenses in your balance sheet. Of course, for employees, but also for telecommunications and so on. And also, very, very important, for the place of business. Because a company without a place of business, that's something we definitely don't want. That can actually have serious disadvantages in some cases. So, then mistake number 3. Unfortunately, you see this quite often as well, especially with young entrepreneurs, that the documentation isn't complete, that invoices and receipts are missing, and that the accounting department has to ask several times before the documents are provided. We have a really nice solution with an app where receipts can also be scanned. That's actually standard nowadays, but unfortunately not quite in Cyprus. You still rarely see that here. But it definitely makes life easier. So it's definitely important for you, please, and this is the same everywhere in the world, please keep all your receipts, all invoices, cash receipts and so on, so that you always have a complete set of records, because nothing is more time-consuming, tedious and frustrating than when individual receipts are missing, maybe even completely lost, and you might have to write your own replacement receipts and so on. It's all unnecessary effort. It just increases the cost for accounting, and that's not needed. That's why you should always be accurate, pay attention to completeness, and simply every month send in the corresponding receipts. We do it in such a way that we ask our clients to, by the 5th of each month, submit all receipts for the previous month. Then everything is still fresh, everything is still, so to speak, within reach. Even if 1 or 2 receipts are missing, you can still quickly track them down because they're probably still floating around somewhere. That's why you should always do this promptly, don't put it off, because otherwise a small problem can turn into a bigger one, and nobody needs that. Okay, then the 4th point. I also see it happen from time to time that someone claims private expenses through the company. You do have a very generous tax authority in Cyprus. Basically, you can include a lot of expenses in the company. That's definitely possible, as long as, of course, there is a business purpose. That's a basic requirement. Obviously, but you really shouldn't run private expenses through the company, and especially not small things like a parking ticket or a coffee or something like that, because that just adds to the bookkeeping workload and causes extra costs for accounting. That's unnecessary, and you should always keep things separate as a rule. That means in Cyprus, you usually make a profit distribution, and you can also do that during the year. And if you, just as an example, need 10,000 euros, then you distribute that to your private account. We prepare the necessary documentation so that everything is formally correct. And then, of course, you can make all your private expenses from your private account, but please don't do it through the business account. You wouldn't believe how often that actually happens. And it really is an unnecessary extra effort and only raises questions. And that really doesn't have to be the case. And then the 5th crucial mistake, mistake number 5 to be precise, that you could potentially make in Cyprus, but which I most definitely and strongly advise you to meticulously avoid, is focusing far too much on the initial costs when it specifically comes to essential accounting services, comprehensive tax support, and invaluable legal advice. Remember, quality invariably has its price. It doesn't always necessarily have to be at the very absolute top of the financial scale, but truly good, reliable advice and consistently good professional support do indeed cost something significant. I see it very, very often that no proper accounting is done at all, that only, let's say, the absolute bare minimum is done just so you can submit the VAT return and WS report, and then some sporadic bookkeeping is carried out simply to keep the effort as low as possible. Frankly, I don't think that's a good idea at all. So we always make a great effort to do everything, to submit everything on time within the deadlines, and to do so calmly and without stress, no matter what it's about, so that there are no fines, no penalties, and you don't have to chase after deadlines at the last minute. And it's also very, very important to always have a bit of a buffer. That means only using about 90% of your capacity, so you always have some breathing room in case a new project comes in unexpectedly or a new set of accounts to handle. We experience this from time to time where a bookkeeper hasn't done anything for a year, and then we take over the accounting and, of course, want to bring everything up to date in a very short period. So that's why it's really important. Basically, it's essential to remember that quality always comes before price. That's not just true when buying a car or a house or with many other things, but especially when it comes to accounting and all tax-related matters. I see this very, very often where I come across setups in which far too much is paid in social security contributions, where other optimization opportunities are not used at all, and where, with just a few tricks, you could save clients several thousand euros a year in taxes and social security contributions. Yes, and just with that, the annual fee for our accounting services has already paid for itself 3 or even 5 times over. So anyone who thinks they can save 50 euros a month on accounting by handing it over to the cheapest accountant is really barking up the wrong tree. That usually just leads to more hassle, and then you have a contact person who might not even be reachable, who doesn't really know you, where you're just a number at the end of the day, and where no one really takes the time to deal with your documents or your numbers. And that is, I think, not a good situation. Nobody wants that. So I hope these quick and concise tips have been helpful to you. If you have questions about starting a company in Cyprus, about tax support, immigration, or non-dom status, then please feel free to contact me anytime. My name is Florian Wilk. I am the Managing Director of CMC here in Larnaka and in Paphos, Cyprus, and we are very happy to support entrepreneurs and freelancers in moving to Cyprus. And even if you already have a company in Cyprus and are not satisfied, which we are seeing more and more often, and you would like to switch over to us, we are of course also very happy to discuss the terms, possible optimizations, and the exact process so that we can lay the foundation for a long-term, years-long collaboration. You'll find a link below the video where you can book a free initial consultation with me, and then very soon we'll be talking about your personal situation, your plans, and I can immediately give you the first valuable and directly actionable tips. So thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video.